Hey everybody, my name is Gabriela Rodriguez and I want to welcome you to Together We Thrive, part of a series of topics that are pressing our community through this uncertain time. Next slide. To tell you a little bit about the Orlando United Assistance Center, we were created after the Pulse tragedy as a response to the needs of those that were primarily impacted. Our mission is to assist those in Central Florida who were affected in the long-term healing through targeted mental health services, community building, and awareness. Next slide. I want to introduce myself one more time. My name is Gabriela Rodriguez. I work at the Orlando United Assistance Center as a community development and case manager. Michael?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Freeman. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. In addition to my own practice, I support the amazing team at the OUAC, our survivors, families, and everyone affected by the Pulse. Ms. Cynthia?
Hi, I'm Cynthia Arrington, part of the OUAC team. I handle the front desk and office management, and just glad to be here to help serve our community.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jesse Arias. I'm also a OUAC case manager since May of 2017.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joel Jr. Morales. My preferred pronouns are he, him, his. I'm the Director of Operations for the LGBT Center in Orlando, a former colleague of the OUAC, and also a chapter coordinator for Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, working towards policies to address victims' needs in Central Florida and Florida.
Hey y'all, I'm Emily. My pronouns are she and her. I work at Victim Service Center. My position is a joint position between Victim Service Center and Zebra Coalition, and I am a victim advocate and crisis counselor, and I specialize in working with the LGBTQ community after they've experienced sexual assault.
All right, thank you everybody for joining us today on this conversation. Next slide. So I kind of wanted to go, next slide, to go into a conversation to invite you to one of many of our community check-ins where we discuss a variety of different topics and experiences that generate the needed knowledge and support during these critical days ahead. We've just created a YouTube channel, so our last conversation that we had last week was on caregiving during COVID-19, so definitely go check that out. And I urge anyone to send in any questions you may have for any episodes or any pressing topics that you may have that you want to talk about or may need support on. Next slide. Michael, can you give a little bit of pretense on the YouTube channel as far as the likes, comments, and subscribe? All right, so on our YouTube channel, you're able to like, comment, and subscribe. So after this session, it will be posted on our social media on Monday, as well as we'll have it on other different channels and we're spreading the news that way. So please send any of your comments through any of those channels, or we'll have our social media posted so that you guys can send through that avenue as well. Next slide. All right, Michael, would you be able to give us a disclosure on triggers as far as the topic that we're going to be discussing today?
Yes, thanks, Gabby. I think it's very, very important that folks understand that the subject that we're talking about today can cause some distress, can cause some alarm. We often talk about what are triggers to take people back to places of previous trauma, and so we always want you to please make sure and take care of yourself. If you find yourself getting triggered, it is just simply step away from what you're watching, put it on mute, and come back to it.
I appreciate that, Michael. Thank you. I also wanted to give a moment to acknowledge experiences. I know that everybody's experience is different, but the hopes are for those that are listening that they can take away those tools to be able to utilize in their settings and in their spaces, and to know that they're not alone in these feelings or thoughts that they're having right now. So we're trying to find different ways that we're able to connect with the community and share with each other and be able to help each other. So as I mentioned, we were going to be speaking on when house isn't a home. And as a world, we're all fighting to combat the spread of the coronavirus. The government has now implemented shutdowns to protect our vulnerable populations, the aging with underlying issues. We've had mandated orders of social distancing, your stay-at-home orders, and what that means for different communities that are now having to transition from work and experiencing being laid off, being terminated, and the undue amount of stress that has created among the community and the world when economic hardships exist. Domestic violence rises, interpersonal violence, child abuse, animal cruelty, and we think of all those that are not being reported. In China, I was reading this article the other day that mentioned that there's been a surge in domestic violence while people are in quarantine. I think it said 70% rise in calls. And that was in the beginning and then shortly thereafter, because I think they've recently been, different measures are being taken there as far as them now being able to go out into community and what that looks like. So I want to take this opportunity just to mention that this conversation is going to be about resources, personal experiences, as well as some of the trends and things that we've seen as well. So Emily and Michael, I would love for you to highlight on what you guys are seeing and what's happening now.
Emily, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll preface this by saying that at Victim Service Center, while we specialize in sexual assault, we work with people who have experienced any type of trauma. So we also serve a lot of people who have experienced intimate partner violence and domestic violence. So some of our data over like the last month since all of this like social distancing started, I was able to pull some of our numbers. So our acute cases, that's when we do the forensic collection of evidence after someone's been sexually assaulted. We're hearing that generally acute cases are going down because people aren't going to bars and stuff as much. But we are hearing that acute cases, because of like intimate partner violence or acquaintance rape or something like that, has been going up. So I was able to pull the numbers for our cases for the month of March in 2018, 2019, and 2020. And what we found is in 2018, we had 30 forensic exams in the month of March, and 63% of those were acquaintance. So acquaintance would be, that's where intimate partner domestic violence would fall into that category for us. In 2019, 55% of our cases, and we had 33 cases that month, 55% were intimate partner violence or acquaintance related. Now in 2020, that number was 81%. So that's significantly higher. The highest before then was 63%. So it jumped from 63 to 81% of our cases. We also did 26 acute cases that month. So it's only down about 2 or 3 cases from what our monthly average for the month of March typically is. So that tells me that we are still seeing a good amount of cases, and even more of them are related to intimate partner violence or domestic violence.
And I think for me, particularly in my private practice, although we certainly know the numbers when we look at incidents, and if we measure that only based upon calls, we know that calls will be down because, of course, the victim does not have access to phone or space in which to call. Because I'm doing all of my work now through virtually, it is often very difficult for a survivor, a victim, to find a place to even have therapy. And so a lot of what I'm seeing now particularly is that when we take the quarantine and we add to it trying to teach children at home, one or both partners without jobs, the financial squeeze, all of that just continues to add to the number of, and then I would say the just how bad some of this is. And again, I think it's important to understand that this doesn't always happen physically. And so what I've seen a tremendous increase in is around the emotional abuse that goes on. And so, you know, particularly in terms of gaslighting, you know, particularly in terms of, you know, you're not doing your part. And I do want to make sure that, because I know we've got a great representation, you know, on this panel, but we are clearly looking at and trying to address, you know, same-sex partners as well as opposite-sex partners, the role of sexual orientation or gender identity, the influence of culture that is in here as a part of this is all very, very important. Gabby, back to you.
I agree. Thank you for making that mention. And I think that whole power and control and what that looks like, and the fact that we have very little control right now. And I think we had a previous conversation on how if I have nothing that I can control right now and you're that person, then you're going to be that individual. And how do we manage that? Especially when we think about for survivors, going to work or being able to be out in public is a way to be visible. We think about our children. We think about the fact that these kids are not being seen now. I think, Emily, the conversation that we had earlier is, what were you mentioning that you had heard?
Yeah, so I was talking to some of our community partners. So we're in Orange, Osceola, and Seminole counties. So I was talking to some of our community partners yesterday in Osceola County. And some of what they all noticed, I think it'll be some time before we get like the specific numbers of how these things have gone up and down during quarantine. But I talked with someone who works in child abuse prevention, and they mentioned that they have had a lot less cases, or that like DCF has been getting less calls. And I mean, my guess would be that a lot of those calls probably come in like when kids go to school or out in the community. And now they're not doing that. So these calls of child abuse are not coming in. And then I also heard that intakes in the jail systems right now, the majority of the intakes, at least in Osceola County, that they have been getting have been domestic dispute related.
So, I mean, we think about perpetrators that are isolating their victims off from the relationships that they've had from going out. So now that everything is telehealth, and as Freeman had mentioned, the access there and what the reality is, because now we have our kids now going to school on a lot of these electronic devices. So what does access look like for the rest of the family as well? So I think those are a lot of topics that are pressing on a lot of people's minds right now. So
I think it's why I think we have to be so very careful when we are, when we look at numbers as a factor in terms of resources, because those numbers aren't the whole story. And so we know that a majority of those cases, particularly around child abuse, are found through public schools. And so if you keep that all behind doors, then of course it's going to be low. And, you know, I have a client who told me about that she had a colleague, and the family would not allow the child to be seen when they did a Zoom classroom. And so someone surmised that perhaps it was because the child had some visible marks or something on it, because the father was very insistent that that not happen. And that hadn't been the way it had been since they had gone virtually. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you just have to wonder, you really just have to wonder.
Yeah, those are really great points, because just speaking on my own personal experience, Michael, and what you had shared earlier when it comes to the cultural norms of things. And I think about myself as a child, and being raised Puerto Rican with a very machismo culture where violence, I grew up with violence in the household. And none of those experiences was something that was reported or captured. So I do agree with that. A lot of times the numbers that we see, they're alarming, right? The numbers are alarming in whichever way you see them. But imagine all the unreported cases that are out there. That's more alarming sometimes to me.
Thank you for highlighting that, Joelle. That's definitely a topic. Again, culture, we're told to cállate, keep going, you wear your long sleeve shirt and you walk out the door and you go to school, because then again, you're gonna bring problems to the family. Don't you have a DCF worker, call me. Like, those are real life conversations that happen. And
or alone, or just it's normalized, right? It just could be something normal. We all go through these in our homes. So sometimes we don't share that information outside of the home. We know we have to keep it quiet, right? Some people might be like internalizing these feelings and these thoughts and not maybe share that information to their colleagues, even out of quarantine, right? So I can imagine right now what some families are going through.
I agree. And we'll speak a little bit more on the just checking in on individuals and just being there and being that listening ear, because I think that's what we all need right now. But it's a difficult time for everybody. So what does that look like, and how we can lend a compassionate ear to someone else in need? So I wanted to go in a little bit further into the data that we had mentioned as far as what the numbers say on lifetime intimate partner violence. I know, Joelle, you recently gave a presentation and spoke a little bit about this, if you wouldn't mind going into it.
Yeah, sure. A lot of times when it comes to intimate partner violence, as I shared earlier in my statements growing up, me personally, just going to my personal story, a lot of times these numbers are not captured. But what we could see here in a lifetime for intimate partner violence, in a general population between men and women, women are most likely to be a victim of intimate partner violence. And within heterosexual couples, once again, women are most likely to be victims of intimate partner violence. Within bisexual numbers, once again, women are the highest, and then within gay and lesbian, women. So once again, women's in these numbers, they're huge to look at.
Thank you. Jesse, could you give me your perspective and go to the next slide, please? On some of the numbers that...
Sure. So there's about 12 million people that are affected by the intimate partner violence alone. And, you know, there's a lot of, I just want to also kind of address the stigma that surrounds a lot of the, I would say probably for males, when they are probably, let's say, on the end of as perpetrators or as men who are being abused or in abusive or domestic violence relationships. I can definitely speak from the side that, you know, growing up in the kind of environment that when I was a child, you know, it wasn't unheard of to hear things like, oh, you know, hitting women or doing something like that will keep them in line or will, you know, cause them to listen to you, or you should do it from here and there. And, you know, now that I've gotten older, that couldn't be further away from the truth. And I just want to talk about that. You know, for men, it's incredibly hard, and I'm sure for women as well too. For men, it's incredibly hard. We live in a society where speaking about feelings or opening up or being vulnerable is kind of looked down upon, or sometimes it's, you know, you can be made fun of from your own friends by talking about something that might have made you insecure or being jealous or, you know, being in fear that you might not be able to have someone to support you. So I would definitely say that, you know, you're not alone in that.
Thank you for highlighting that. I think I was recently reading something and I didn't realize how the numbers were so high, but those that have seen abuse, and those are just the numbers that have been captured. So think about, again, the culture and where all that lies as well. Michael, can you speak a little bit about our voiceless population, our children within this?
Thanks, Gabby. Again, I'm glad that we're going to be spending the whole session on this, because I do think that when we look at how domestic violence, violence within the family unit plays out, particularly in how it impacts children, is important not only in that moment, but to also understand what the impact of that is to that developing child. And so who that child is going to be, the issues of safety and security, how that gets impacted during key developmental periods is very, very important. I mean, I would say 80% of my work is around trauma. And I would say nearly half of that relates to developmental trauma. And so trauma that has taken place in a home, where there is violence. And so it is not only the cost presently, but it's what's going to happen to that young person as they get older. We look at not only developmental theory, but we look at attachment theory. And so how does a child learn to, in a healthy way, learn to attach to someone? And so in working with couples where you have survivors, children who have survived, violence in the home, who cannot even sort of sustain a healthy relationship, or as we learn, repeat that cycle. And so, I do want to go back to something, Joel, you started with, and that is around the cultural inference. What is the influence of culture? And so to me, certainly as a white man, and I have the pleasure of teaching cultural competencies in the School of Social Work at UCF, it is certainly being aware of that, and at the same time understanding that if I have a family and the family of color and they are there, I still have a responsibility in terms of what the law is and what the law says. And so, to have one of my fathers say to me, "I'll beat the hell out of my kid anytime I want to," you just have to respectfully say, "No, I don't think so." And so it becomes another layer that we have to sort of push apart. And so this notion of shame that a person grows up with, and Joel, I'll use, what you've already brought up, how does a child and then a young person carry that in terms of their own mental health and mental well-being? So
yeah. It all wraps around like I was going to share earlier. When I grew up, having these experiences at home and with the culture I was brought up in, just thinking it was normal. And then once I came into my own experiences of being queer and like finding out my own sexual orientation and going through those trials and tribulations and just trying to figure myself out, I remember one of my first serious relationships, which I thought was the love of my life. I was in my early 20s. And it was a intimate partner violence situation. I was in this relationship for about 6 months. 6 months before the stuff started happening. And once again, at that time, I was in the closet. And in my professional life, or even in my day-to-day, people didn't know what was happening within my own home just because of my identity, and I was trying to hide those things. And a lot of times we do live with a lot of shame, especially men sometimes, to come forward and talk about their victimization. And once I had the courage, and we do know that a lot of times people who are in intimate partner violence or in domestic violence situations, it takes them about 7 times to get out of a situation, right? Take them up to that, or maybe more. And in my situation, I remember once it got really bad, I was in my car, not to go into like graphic details of what happened, but let's just say that I was threatened with death and all these other things, and I called law enforcement. And the number one thing, I already had this weird relationship when it came to law enforcement. As a child, just see a lot of family members being locked up or in jail for whatever reason or the other. So I never had this trust within law enforcement. And once I was going through this abuse, I called law enforcement. And to this day, right, like there's an increase of recognition within same-sex couples, but a lot of times, even with marriage equality passed, it's still not as recognized, right? And a lot of times these go unreported. And I'm talking about 15 years back, right? And people are still going through that today. And over 15 years, I'm 37 now, so this is in my early 20s, but whatever. So I remember when I went through the experience and I ended up calling the cops, and the cops came to the household, and what they said to me was, grow some balls, and then also looked at my partner like, what are you guys doing? You get out of the car, you put that knife away, nothing, there was no follow-up. And then at that moment, I just internalized that. I'm like, okay, I guess this is normal, and I deserve to be in this situation. So there was no follow-up after that. So I kind of stood in that relationship. In that moment, I took the courage to actually call, and I just stood in that relationship, and then it just got progressively worse and worse and worse, to a point that I remember it was a New Year's Eve, and one of my, like, you know, like it was bad. So one of my best friends came because she was the first person I called. And I'm like, hey, oh my God, I'm going through this situation. Once she got to the house, she's like, Joelle, call the cops. And I'm like, what are they gonna do, right, at this time? And she ended up calling the law enforcement. They came, they took the pictures, and basically they told me at that time, like, oh, well, because the phone was under his name, he has all the right to be there. They didn't take the situation serious. So I had to rely on my friends' support to get out of that situation. So if it wasn't for my friends and having friends, I probably would have been dead, you know, or would have been in that situation for a lot longer than what it was. And many people go through that. And I hear it all the time, especially working at the center here. I get the calls a lot of times, and it's a lot harder to walk out of a situation or even find support. And I get a lot of calls, and sometimes it could be easier said than done, right? You could just walk away, but it's not that easy for a lot of people, especially within vulnerable communities.
I agree. Thank you very much, Joelle, for mentioning that. I think being able to highlight that and bring that perspective to light is extremely important. I know myself, within growing up and seeing that normalized, again, it ran into my relationships growing up, identifying as pansexual, but back then didn't know what my orientation was back in the day. So like, just within all my relationships, I was reactive. That was the way I handled situations, and it was to go back and forth and screaming out. And I think it wasn't until someone else came into the picture, and from the outside, and even though I was very, very upset in the beginning because it ruined, I wouldn't say ruined, it caused a lot of disruption in my life. I was glad that someone from the outside was able to see and reach out, because it caused a lot of learning curves. It caused a lot of different ways to be able to handle different situations. So in the beginning, there was a lot of emotion that was there, but towards the end, I was able to see why there was a need, and glad to know that there were people out there that were looking out for me. And Joelle, you mentioned something extremely important, is identifying at least one or two people that you can reach out to that know your situation. And even though it may take 7, 12, 13 times to get out of that situation, at least to have that person there, and so that you can go back and forth with. And I think that is one of the most important things when it comes to how you can support a survivor at home and what that looks like. So that goes into the next piece that I wanted to talk about. Ms. Cynthia, could you speak a little bit about what a safety plan looks like, what the purposes of one, and then Emily kind of highlight past that, and then some tips for, I guess, self-care and some coping mechanisms that you've seen or that you've used in your personal life? Ms. Cynthia?
I didn't hear the question.
All right. So the question was, what support can survivors use at home?
I didn't.
Emily, would you like to take that question and then
I
we'll
didn't hear your question. Can you repeat the question? Emily, go ahead, or I don't know what you're saying.
Yes. What support can survivors use at home when they are isolated and in these situations where they are with their perpetrators? Either from personal experience or creating safety plans, self-care. What are your thoughts on that?
Ms. Cynthia, can you hear us?
I can hear you. I can't hear Gabby. Gabby's breaking up. I'm sorry.
Okay, is everybody else able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Is anybody else able to relay the question to Ms. Cynthia, please?
Miss Cynthia, you want to tell us a little bit about some tips for survivors or some different supports that they might be able to reach out to or use if they're in a situation like this right now?
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah. Well, I recommend calling. There's a hotline for abuse hotlines, domestic violence hotline. I also recommend 211 that has a lot of resources 24 hours a day. You can call in and the Harbor House, other support systems. They'll also try to help you, an escape plan to prepare yourself to get out of that if you're able to do. One will not do situations. We can't return a call back to you for safety reasons because a lot of times the abuser checks your phone to see who you're calling, and if they find out you are reaching out for help, sometimes the violence will escalate. So yeah, and like I think I was hearing someone say to make sure, Joel was saying that he called a friend, have a number of a friend, let somebody know that what's going on. Documentation is key to survival and to prosecution at times. Document, take pictures, sometimes take those pictures and give them to a family member, because again, an abuser would go through your phone a lot of times, erase your content. So just prepare yourself. You have to get a different mindset. I have done. And before we move on to Gabby, I was wanting to share, you shared a bit of your story. I wanted us to consider also, and Michael, you're very aware of this, in the Black culture, African-American culture, how domestic violence, it runs rampant, but we have that line that says what goes on in our house stays in our house. And so we've been taught to be silent. If you're in the Christian arena, you're taught to pray and to not expose, what's going on in your family. And you get labeled all kind of things. When I went through a certain, I had to go to court, I was told that I was going to the world for help and not keeping it and dealing with it as a Christian should. So there are a lot of factors that are going on in our culture that keeps this thing perpetuating through family lines and generation upon generation. You see mom get beat up, and so you think when you get in a relationship that's normal. If he loves me, he's gonna beat me, So yeah.
Thank you. Emily, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so I could just mention some of the things that I'm working on with a lot of my clients. We always talk about safety planning. It comes up in every appointment that I ever have with my clients anytime I communicate with them. So just coming up with a safety plan that works for you. There's a lot of different tips out there. Having someone to reach out to. One thing we tell people sometimes is to have a bag packed if there's a safe place where you can hide it so that the perpetrator won't find it in case you do need to leave in the middle of the night or something, so that that's easy to grab and go. Identifying a place where you can go. All these hotlines are so important because if you don't have like a friend or a family member or something that you can go stay with, these hotlines can help you find someone that you can go stay with, somewhere that you can go. It is a little different right now during this whole situation with quarantine. So I know the conversations that I'm having right now are, oh, the person that I would usually go to if I needed support isn't available right now. Or I would go stay at a hotel, but what if I can't get into a hotel or something like that? So just kind of like reaching out to those hotline numbers, calling 211, talking to those people who can give you a different perspective to help you kind of think outside the box is really important. There might be like, it's hard to think of those things yourself. So there might be some tips that other people can give you because they're outside of that situation. It's a lot easier to see the problem from the outside looking in than it is when you're inside of it. And it feels really overwhelming, like there's no way out and nowhere to go. I think also just if you are that support system for someone, say you are the friend that they were going to reach out to in one of these situations, just being a listening ear to them is so important right now, because when you're isolated, you may not have a lot of people to talk to, especially if you're isolated with someone who is emotionally or physically abusive. You may not be ready to come out of it yet. Like, I'm glad that you guys brought up the statistic of that it takes people an average of 7 times to leave. They might not actually be ready to leave, or they might feel like they don't have anywhere to go right now because they're isolated during quarantine. So you might really help someone feel better just by being able to give them an outlet for some of those reactions and emotions that they're feeling right now, just to be able to get that out.
I agree.
And just to like share a little bit too, especially during this time, even if the person is not going through the situation and just being in quarantine, a lot of times those old feelings or those old memories may come back. And it's okay to talk about that with someone and reach out to those individuals that maybe helped you during that time and just reconnect, because a lot of times situations like this can bring certain memories back.
Well, and Gabby, if I could add to that and add to what Emily was saying, having those friends are very important, but sometimes those friends will say, well, you need to leave. You just need to get out of there. And it is never that easy. And so how do you support someone without shaming them around that? You know, and especially right now. And I think, Emily, I do exactly the same thing with my clients. And what I add to that, because we know how finances are often affected, particularly in domestic violence relationships. And so I call it the kitty. And so it is taking $20 every time you go to the grocery store to buy groceries and tucking it away in that same bag, because without some kind of financial assistance, you're not going to get very far in the process.
Thank you for highlighting all those important pieces within that. And you guys mentioned a really good piece on how do you support someone experiencing abuse. So Jesse, could you turn to the next slide and then give a little bit of what are some certain ways that someone can support somebody?
Yeah, so we've listed out a couple of ways that you might, might be able to support someone. If you have someone who they might feel like the violence is their fault, now is definitely the time to reach out. You can always contact someone that is part of your family or that support group and, just let them know it's not their fault. Or you can contact, if you know that someone is going through this, let them know it's not their fault. And like we highlighted before, Try to keep from telling them to just leave. It's, you know, that's a lot. Most of the times people are resourceful. People do have common sense, and it's just not as easy to just pick up and leave. You know, and everyone, the other one that we have is, you know, some basic necessities. Everyone can always use some basic necessities, you know, things like food, transportation, or supplies. You know, just ask the simple question. Sometimes we forget to ask the simple question of, how can I help? And you know, whoever is on the receiving end might be able to say, well, you know what, I could really use some money for diapers right now. I could really use some money for food. You know, he or she took away my money and I don't have it. You know, it could be something as simple as that, and it could go a long way. Sending texts and encouragement. You know, it's always great to have someone tell you, hey, I'm still here for you. It gives them that hope that they're not alone in this. They're not entirely isolated. You could always interrupt or intervene. Just make sure that you are there on, you know, you provide, if you can kind of agree on a code word that will alert you if they need you to kind of intervene or interrupt what's going on, that could also be helpful. Providing I have a different one that's not on here. It's providing a warm referral to a program or community group. We've addressed 211, Harbor House. There's, you know, if you feel like your search history is, you know, if your computer is being watched or something like that, ask a friend if they can search places for you online, you know, and then maybe pass them on. And that would be definitely a way that you can provide a warm referral. And at the end of it, just, you know, make sure to take care of yourself. Take care of yourself in the sense that, you know, that if you have a loved one who's experienced violence or is in a abusive relationship, you know, it's always okay to also take a step back from that and set up a boundary and say, you know, right now this is too much for me to handle, without necessarily abandoning your loved one who is in an abusive relationship. And once you're kind of recharged, then get back in there.
Thank you, Jesse. And a lot of these resources that we're currently mentioning are going to be on a resource guide with some of the local ones from the county as well as state, and then some national numbers. As far as the take care of yourself, for those that are listening, vicarious trauma is real. So ensuring that as you're taking care of yourself while listening to these stories. And there's this amazing toolkit from the University of Washington that discuss little things that you can do as the support to be able to further help someone and yourself as well. So one thing that I did want to mention is, what does it look like after COVID-19 as far as those that aren't able to reach out? Michael, are you able to talk about what that's going to look like after the crisis is over?
Sure. I think if just using my clients, there is tremendous anxiety, of course, of being in the quarantine. But what's not going to stop, even though the quarantine will be the lack of resources. And so people are going to be unemployed. People are then going to be expected to pay rent, buy groceries, take care of childcare, all of those things. And we know that the lack of, or at least the challenge of financial challenges are often a big predictor of what happens inside the family as it relates to domestic violence. And so being able to not only have a plan, a safety plan, but to also be able to, and what I'm encouraging my families to do is to have just a session in terms of what's next after this is over with. It's not like the you know, sort of everybody go, you're free, run, go have a good time. Because then the reality of, okay, what do we do now is going to take place. And so when you already have that level of anxiety, when there is already an existence of something, and I'll use this because this was a very powerful example with my client who has a history of OCD. And so part of it is because of the violence she grew up in and her own relationship in terms of her marriage. And so you tell someone that what they need to do is to wash their hands. And so what has happened to her is that she has, of course, done that so much that her hands bleed. Her partner then hits her, tells her how ugly she is. And so, we have lots of work to do when this is over with. And I don't know. I don't know what the big safety net is. I don't know what that is that we put our arms around everyone to be able to say we're still here. And we understand that perhaps now the hardest work will be ahead of us.
Hey. So I wanted to wrap up the conversation. Thank you very much, Freeman, for mentioning those key points, and thank you everybody for mentioning your perspectives and this important information for our community. I wanted to leave everyone with a quote by Malala, and it's, "I raise my voice not so I can shout, but that so those without a voice can be heard. We cannot succeed when half of us are being held back." So that's a powerful quote that she mentioned. We all have a role in ending domestic and sexual violence, and you don't have to be an expert to help. It doesn't take much to make an impact in someone's life, and your presence, your connection, the support that you can provide for an individual, it gives them a whole new element to be safer and to be able to thrive, especially during this time. And for individuals that are currently experiencing, to know that they're not alone while they're in their house, and to know that there are people outside that are worried about them and that we're here if they need our help. So I kind of wanted to give it out to Ms. Cynthia to start off basically on any last words or thoughts that we had on the discussion.
Just stay safe, guys. Survive, do your best to, especially if you're in a situation that's, life-threatening, or you're feeling, the anxiety of abuse. At this point, do what you need to do to survive. And of course, we're dealing with this coronavirus, so it's a double whammy right now. So we just want to just remind you of the little safety points to just survive this virus. Stay at home as much as you can. Go out to the street. Wash your hands often, for at least 20 minutes that has alcohol in it. Cover your mouth when you cough, into tissue, throw it away, or if you don't have the tissue, cough into your arm, your elbow space. If you're sick, please stay home. And if you really feel bad, please call a doctor and get some help. And if you're sick in your home and you really feel sick, isolate yourself from other people if you're in the home until you're feeling better or you've gotten some medical attention. And again, stay home, save some lives, be wise, and believe in the love of God. Thank you.
Jesse?
Yeah, I definitely would like to end it with, I always want to address the other side of the coin. And if you or anyone that is listening to this podcast, if you know of someone who you feel like might be an abusive partner, and you can have that kind of conversation without ever putting yourself in jeopardy, it's always a good idea to maybe if you feel like maybe this person, or even if yourself, if you feel like you might be an abusive partner, or if your behaviors might be causing, you know, mental or physical harm to someone that you love, there is help for you out there as well. It's acknowledging, or even to start asking yourself, is always a step forward. And just being able to put in the work. You know, it's as easy as going to Google and searching assistance programs or any kind of, you know, therapy. I do believe people are capable of change. I do deeply believe that people are capable of, you know, changing or becoming the kind of person that they want to be. So if you feel like there's a lot of shame around that, you know, you're not alone. You know, if you feel, you know, insecure or jealous or angry a lot of the times, just know that there is some help out there as well as for the people that are in a relationship with someone who is abusive. Again, you're also not alone. You know, there is a lot of help out there for you as well.
Thank you, Jesse. Emily, your final thoughts?
I just want to reiterate that it's really easy when you're isolated inside your home and you might feel it's really lonely. And we talk about all of these services, and it still sometimes might be really hard to reach out to those. Remember that there are texting lines as well. So if you're not comfortable talking to someone over the phone, or if you're not able to because you're in an abusive situation, you don't want someone to hear you, know that those resources are there too. And just remember to take care of yourself. And sometimes that, like, especially right now, is people are having to get really creative about how self-care works, because it's not what the systems that we typically use and the support and stuff may not be there the same way. So there's lots of resources on social media, even though it is a really good idea to take breaks from social media too right now, because that can also be very overwhelming. There's lots of different resources from all of those support systems, the hotline numbers. I know from us, like, we've been posting on our social media a lot, and we've also been posting tips for self-care, just so that you can, it'll help you get creative and get some of those new ideas to help you get some of that support that you might need.
Joelle?
Yeah, so just to echo what a few people already said, just make sure you stay safe during this time. I know it's a difficult time for a lot of people, especially those individuals that may be going through domestic violence or intimate partner violence at this moment. But know that you're not alone, that there is resources out there. And if you don't have a support system, my recommendation is to try to build those support systems and those friends that you can trust and that you can talk to, reach out to. And as Emily shared, during these times, there are a lot of online resources that maybe take you out. Maybe there's some yoga, some meditation videos. There's a lot of free stuff online right now, which I'm totally amazed on. I'm like, all these free movies, they should have been released. You know, take a moment for yourself and take a moment just to look at your neighbor and make sure you do reach out to other people too and check on. And if you're not okay, that's okay, right? It's okay not to be okay. And leave it with that.
Thank you. Michael?
I think just to add a couple of things, Jesse started the conversation. One of the things that is very tough, particularly when you are living with an abuser, is how do you deal with that? How do you help not escalate that? And so to many of the folks, because it is one of the assessments I do with folks, is to find out what their relationship history is. And so we often talk about the power of walking away, the power of taking a breath, power of just separating yourself from what's going on. And so that could be helpful. I appreciate that we could do this. You're going to have lots and lots of resources. Certainly we would ask you down at the bottom, there's the subscribe button, and you can please hit that. There's a little bell. It's a notification, and if you will hit that, you'll be notified every time we post one of these. Please like us. Please comment. We will continue to add resources there, and if you have questions, one of us will be there to answer the questions for you. Gabby?
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I wanted to end on, let's see, I think that was everybody. So next slide, I wanted to go into some of those resources as far as information. Next slide, as information provided by the CDC and being able to stay safe, to get credible information, as well as the World Health Organization to get kind of the global aspect. And then for local information and resources, 211, you're able to text the 898-211 number, and you have 24/7, as Ms. Cynthia mentioned, there's a staff specialist there, as well as they developed a COVID-19 fund, and that the survey can be reached through the hfuw.org/virus. As well as Joel, would you mind talking a little bit about the LGBTQ Relief Fund for those that are able to either donate or are in need of assistance?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. There is a relief fund right now set up in Central Florida. If you go to GoFundMe.com and search Central Florida LGBTQ plus relief fund, it's to help those most in critical need right now in Central Florida, because we do know that those within our community work either in tourism or in hospitalities, and with the overseas closures of all these industries and theme parks, a lot of most vulnerable community members are struggling right now. So there is some type of relief that is out there. You can either donate to Central Florida Relief Fund, Central Florida LGBTQ Relief Fund, or you can also apply for the help if you are one of those people that fall within our vulnerable communities, whether you're undocumented, whether you're self-employed and maybe you don't qualify for unemployment, service workers, there is some relief there out there. So thank you.
Thank you, and I'll make sure we put that in our resource guide as well, and the application's available in a variety of different languages too, so thank you. Next slide, I wanted to talk and just thank everybody for being here, and know that our information will be posted on our channel and social media, and that we discuss a variety of different topics every week with different experiences to generate the knowledge and support that's needed. So our next conversation is going to be on finance. Jesse, are you able to give us a little pretense on that?
Yeah, so let me go back. Next week, we're gonna pretty much host another podcast. And this is a way to kind of conceptualize how people can how to organize their finances or prioritize their finances when, funds are very limited, and finding ways where you can kind of have a general idea of how to make the wisest choice. Just to give you a real quick rundown, it's pretty much going to boil down to, making payments on things that are, the essentials, something like your mortgage or your rent payment comes first, a roof over your head, or if you have job-related expenses, if you need your car to get to work and you have a car payment, those three kind of tie in together, versus something like a credit card payment that's an unsecured debt, and you really won't have creditors come after you. And again, we're going to talk about all the assistance that some of these agencies, banks, companies are providing, where they are delaying payments, they're waiving fees, and they're waiving all kinds of overdraft items, as well as rent, and some mortgages are being set up where you have like payment relief assistance programs. Again, for people that are listening, the sooner you act and the sooner you call them, the better.
Thank you, Jesse. So yes, like I said, I wanted to thank everybody for joining us today, and to stay tuned onto our social media. Next slide. At the Orlando United Assistance Center. We also have Joelle with the center on Facebook and Instagram. Do you guys have a Twitter? I don't actually have a Twitter. Okay, so I will make sure to add that into the resource guide as well. Same thing for Victim Service Center of Central Florida. So thank you, everybody, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Everybody, take care. Be safe.